Hi everybody, this video gives you guys an overview of the functions of behavior. So for this video, I have one objective for you guys. That's to be able to identify the 6 functions of behavior. So for our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say the function of behavior. We're going to briefly talk about the 3-term contingency. We're going to talk about the 6 functions of behavior, and then a little bit about response classes. So if you have a challenging behavior and it just occurs once, then that's not such of a big deal. There could be a couple of reasons as to why it happens. It could be an accident. The learner could have seen his peer do it and model it, things like that. So if it happens once, it happens and we move on. However, if the challenging behavior continues to happen, then it's being reinforced somehow. So either the learner gets something that they like, or they avoid something that they don't like. And when we talk about why the behavior is occurring, we're talking about the function of the behavior. What is the function? What's the maintaining consequence of the behavior? And so we focus on the function when we talk about the why, not the topography. Now, the topography means the form of the behavior or what the behavior looks like. And up until this point in the class, we have focused on topography because the topography or the form or what the behavior looks like is really important when you need to define the target behavior and you need to measure it and you need to graph the data. So all those things are important for topography. But when we talk about why the behavior is continuing to happen, what's the purpose of it, we're talking about the function of the behavior. And when we talk about function, we're talking about the relationship between the behavior and the environment. So I have a throwback slide for you guys. We've talked about this previously, but I wanted to just briefly review it. I wanted to talk about our 3-term contingency. So remember, our 3-term contingency is what we call the ABCs of behavior. So we have our antecedents, which are the environmental stimuli that occur right before the behavior occurs. We have the behavior, and then we have the consequences, or the environmental stimuli that occur right after the behavior occurs. And we're always looking at the relationship between the behavior and these environmental stimuli, so the behavior and the antecedents and the consequences. Remember that operant behavior is a function of its consequences. So whatever the consequence is determines whether this behavior is going to increase or decrease in the future. We talked about this comic with from Calvin and Hobbes, and how Calvin skinned his knee and he starts crying. And I asked you guys, why is he crying? And I gave you the guys example of when there's a sympathetic teacher, Calvin cries because he gets attention. Whereas if he's around older children, Calvin doesn't cry because in the past, when he cried, he was ridiculed or ignored. So if Calvin keeps crying, that means that something's reinforcing that behavior. And in the presence of a sympathetic teacher, she provides him with attention. So his behavior of crying is increasing in her presence because he's getting attention from her. So the maintaining consequence is attention. So when we're talking about the function of behavior, we're talking about the relationship between the behavior and the consequence, and what this maintaining consequence actually is. And we want to determine through our analysis, like I said, what this maintaining consequence is or what the function of the behavior is. All right, your book has classified 6 different categories of functions of behavior, and they've identified the maintaining consequence. So the first function is that a learner can engage in a challenging behavior to gain attention. And the maintaining consequence of that is positive reinforcement. So the learner cusses and gets reprimand from the teacher, which is attention, and therefore the cussing increases in the future. So the function of the cussing or the function of that behavior would be to gain attention. Kids can also engage in a problem behavior to gain a tangible. So this is typically something concrete, to gain access to an object such as an iPad or an activity or even a person. And the maintaining consequence for that is also positive reinforcement. The third category is to gain sensory stimulation. And so when we talk about sensory stimulation, we're talking about automatic reinforcement in the sense that the behavior within itself produces the reinforcer. So if you think about these two up here, so gain attention and gain intangible, the attention and the tangible are provided by another person. But with sensory stimulation, we refer to it as automatic reinforcement because the behavior within itself produces the reinforcer. Sometimes our kids with autism will take the palms of their hands and press it against their eyes, and it produces this visual stimulation. That would be an example of gaining sensory stimulation because the behavior itself of pressing their palms against their eyes creates that visual stimulation. So that maintaining consequence would be positive automatic reinforcement. A kid can also engage in challenging behavior to escape from attention, and this would be negative reinforcement. That would be the maintaining consequence. So maybe the kid is getting attention from a teacher or peers, and it's aversive. So the kid engages in a problem behavior to escape from that attention. You can also escape from a demanding or boring task, activity, or event, also maintained by negative reinforcement. So the task or the activity or event is aversive, and so they engage in challenging behavior and get to escape from that task. And then you can also have escape from sensory stimulation. So this would be negative automatic reinforcement. Now you see that automatic reinforcement again. So this means the behavior within itself allows the escape from the aversive stimulus. So for instance, if you hear a really loud noise and you put your hands over your ears, you putting your hands over your ears, that behavior within itself removes the aversive sound or the aversive stimulus. So escape from sensory stimulation, the maintaining consequence is negative automatic reinforcement. All right, I did want to point out that different topographies or different forms of a behavior or different behaviors can have the same effect on the environment. So different behaviors can have the same function. And when different behaviors have the same function, we call that a functional response class. So if you look at this picture right here, screaming, the function of screaming for this kid is attention. So maintaining consequences, positive reinforcement. He throws objects, the function is attention. He name calls, he gets attention, and he self-bites and he gets attention. He hits his head and he gets attention, and he strips and he gets attention. So all of the behaviors that the function is attention for, they all enter into a functional response class. So if he wants attention, he can engage in any one of these behaviors in this response class, and they all function for attention. The function is all attention. Whereas if you look at he kicks and he gets to get out of a task, he spits, he avoids a task, he self-induces vomit, avoids a task, and runs away, avoids a task. All of the ones where he avoids a task or he escapes, those all enter into a response class in which the function is escape. So you can have different topographies or different behaviors that have the same function or the same effect on the environment. Also, last point on functions, the same behavior can have different functions. So sometimes the kid can engage in physical aggression because they escape from the teacher talking to them, or they can engage in physical aggression because the teacher actually comes to talk things out with the student, or they can engage in physical aggression because a preferred activity is given to neutralize the situation, so they gain a tangible. Or they can engage in physical aggression because turning their head from side to side allows the client to chill, and that would be to gain sensory stimulation. So you can see all these functions come out. Same behavior, but they have multiple functions, and so that's when it gets challenging, and that's why we do an extensive function-based assessment to figure out what exactly is the problem behavior, and we look at its relationship between the behavior and the consequence, and we look at, okay, what's going on in different situations, what's the function of the behavior, because the same behavior could have multiple functions. And then I love this quote. It says, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that fits all cases." So I think this is really important to think about when you think about challenging behaviors and looking at the function, because you want to look at it on an individual level. You don't just want to say, okay, little Johnny hits and little Sam hits. Okay, they're both hitting. They serve this. Those behaviors serve the same function. That's not the case. You have to look at little Johnny and his hitting, and look at the function, and look at the relationship between his behavior and the antecedents and consequences. And then you need to look at the other student and do an assessment on his behavior as well. So every behavior is different. It's not the case that hitting, the function of hitting is always attention. It can be different for all kids and for all behaviors. So keep that in mind. This is all individualized. You always want to do an assessment and look at the function for each challenging behavior. All right, so in this video, we talked about the topography and the functional behavior. We talked about the 6 functions of the behavior. We talked about functional response classes. So those classes in which the topography is different, but they serve the same function. And then we talked about how the same behavior, or the behavior that looks the same, can actually have different functions. So thank you guys for listening, and please let me know if you guys have any questions. All right, thanks guys.